Okay, friends, this afternoon in the Dhamma Talk today, I want to going over the four foundations of mindfulness, and from the sutta, from the Satipatthana Sutta, and also from the Anapanasati Sutta. And these two suttas, the Satipatthana Sutta, four foundations of mindfulness, and the Anapanasati Sutta, mindfulness of breathing. These are the two sort of main and important discourses of the Buddha on meditation, on what we normally call the samatha and vipassana meditation, on the development of concentration and insight. And they're very similar in some respects and a little bit different in some other aspects. And I want to try to, as we go along, to point out some of those, because many of you are familiar with having read those suttas, and sometimes there's still some misunderstandings in interpreting those methods of meditation. So most of you probably are quite familiar with the four foundations of mindfulness. And the Buddha starts out that discourse by saying, this is the direct path for the overcoming of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair, for abolishing ignorance, and for entering the right path to the end of suffering. And in that, as I already mentioned yesterday, the first instructions basically were to go out and find a suitable place to meditate, sit down, cross the legs, keep the back straight, and set up mindfulness in front. Now, that introduction is the same introduction that he used in the Anapanasati Sutta also, the exact same wording. And these are the only two suttas that the Buddha specified that gave that particular instructions. That one goes out and finds a suitable place to meditate, whether it's in an open field or it's in an empty house, but the fact of sitting down, folding the legs crossways, keeping the back erect, and setting up mindfulness in front. And even this next part also is similar in each one. And then mindfully, one breathes in a long breath, and mindfully one breathes out a long breath. Or one breathes in, mindfully breathes in a short breath, one breathes out a short breath. And so that basically is, the beginning of developing concentration. And he mentions, it's interesting, the long breath and the short breath. And he mentions a long breath first, breathing in a long breath. The person knows that he's bringing in a long breath. And breathing out a long breath, the person understands that he or she is breathing out a long breath. Then when breathing in a short breath, one understands one is breathing in a short breath. And when breathing out a short breath, one understands one is breathing out a short breath. Now, he mentions the long breath before mentioning the short breath. Now, some teachers may say, oh, well, it's just, it doesn't matter. It was unimportant or so on. But myself being a yoga practitioner and so on, and understanding the value of, doing deep, slow breathing in the beginning, I tend to try to see it as, intentionally he wanted people to take some deep, slow breaths. But I'm not going to get into any arguments about that, whether if that's real or not. But then he goes on to give some similes. Just as an apprentice for a lathe worker, you know what a lathe is? In a machine shop, there's a thing going around and a person cuts patterns and circles on wood. So just as a lathe apprentice, when making a long turn, he knows he's making a long turn. And when making a short turn, he knows he's making a short turn. How would he know he's making a short turn or long turn unless he actually had the thing set up and he had a big piece of wood, which would require a long turn, or a smaller piece of wood that would require a short turn? So that's why I tend to side with the idea that the Buddha actually, wanted people to take long breaths first, because of all of those things I've already talked about developing deep, slow breathing. And then, having done that for a while, then one lets go of the longer breathing, and then the breath will naturally go back to shorter breaths. But anyway, that's just one way that I guess, validate my use of, instructions on encouraging people to develop deep, slow breathing first as an aid for concentrating. So and then, so it goes from long breathing to the short breathing. And then after that, by doing that, of course, you're gaining concentration. And just as a lathe worker has to focus on that lathe and making sure that thing is going right, the same way as we use that, focusing on the whole in-breath and the out-breath with that kind of concentration. And so you're developing concentration while you're doing that. And then the third instruction, after observing the long breaths, the short breaths, then he mentions experiencing the whole body breathing in and experiencing the whole body breathing out. Now also in that phrase, the people interpret it different ways. Vipassana meditators would interpret it as you're breathing in, you feel the rippling effects of the breathing, or you feel the body around the breathing. So the breathing is happening there in the middle, but while you're breathing in, experiencing the whole body means feeling the sensations around in the breathing. But in the commentary to the sutta, when it says experiencing the whole body, it means the breath body. That means to feel the beginning, the middle, and the end of the in-breath, And it doesn't mention the pause, but I usually include the pause too, because the pause is natural in between the breaths. And then you experience the beginning, the middle, and the end of the out breath. So the whole breath body, you could see it like a Ferris wheel, the carnival, you know, those big wheels, and you get in at the bottom, and it takes you up to the top. Sometimes it pauses a little bit, and it comes down to the bottom. And so the in-breath is like that. You feel the whole in-breath body. It begins, it lasts a few seconds. So the beginning is the initial expansion. The middle is the continuation of it, and the end of it is the last stopping of it. And then the brief pause. And then if you're aware of the pause, you'll be right there for the start of the out breath. But because normally people don't mention the pause, as soon as the breath stops, their mind wanders. In that pause, even if it's a microsecond, the mind can wander that fast, right? I think you all have that experience. If you give the mind 1 second of idle time, it can already be around the world. So that pause, that's why I emphasize paying attention to the pause also. Because the end of the in-breath, you have to follow the breath to the end to feel the pause. So it helps you to follow that all the way to the end, and you see the little pause, microsecond. And you see you're right there for the beginning of the out-breath. Then you see the beginning, the middle, and the end of the out-breath. And basically that means the contracting sensations, especially if you're focusing the breathing in here, and that's why I prefer that kind of focus of attention especially for Vipassana meditation, because it's more easy to see those little separate, little contracting movements and expanding movements, as opposed to trying to feel the touch of air at the nostrils. So, as you're experiencing the whole breath body, that means you're getting even more concentrated. And then after that, or while you're doing that, the mind is becoming very tranquilized. And also, at some point, you would already have let go of the controlled breathing, or at any point along that time. When the mind gets more tranquil, you will naturally not feel like doing the deep breathing. So at some point along there, the controlling the breath would be let go of. And then you're observing the shorter breaths. And at that time, the breath can always be changing. So sometimes it may be longer, sometimes it may be shorter. Because you're not controlling it anymore, so you don't know what breath is coming next. And so the next breath might be long or short, or in all different sort of lengths. But that helps to keep your attention there. And when the breath becomes, as the shorter breaths become shorter, they also become fainter. Because the mind is becoming tranquil, not so many thoughts. And so the need for deeper breathing is no longer necessary, because you're no longer also moving around. By that time, and that period of time could take somebody, it could take 5 minutes, it could take 15 minutes, it could take 20 minutes, it could take an hour, it could take a couple of hours, for each person is different. There's no set amount of time when one would go through those stages. Or for beginners, naturally, it would take a lot longer time, or for people who just started a retreat, maybe they hadn't been keeping up a good daily practice all the time, so naturally it takes them more time. With somebody else who maintains a regular, steady, good meditation daily practice, then for them, it could take as few as a few minutes or so. But anyway, so experiencing the whole breath body, and then the next one after that is tranquilizing the body. Breathing in, tranquilizing the body. Breathing out, tranquilizing the body. And this means, could be, when they use the term body, it could refer to this actual physical body, but it can also refer to the breath body itself. But usually both will tranquilize at the same time. And what does that mean? That means you stop fidgeting around. And the mind is becoming externally and internally more tranquilized, like you had an injection of a tranquilizer. So in the beginning, people might be moving around and, trying to get rid of a little itch or some discomfort and so on. But so that tranquilizes as you gain the concentration. All those obvious body movements tranquilize, as well as the breathing tranquilizes. It means it gets less frequent. And so there might be even become longer pauses between the breaths. Sometimes, like after an out breath, the breathing might have a longer pause of even 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, maybe even longer. Because the body doesn't need so much oxygen. And also because our thoughts have slowed down. By that time, our mind also becoming tranquilized. I mean, not so many neurotic, wandering thoughts. And that also decreases the need for oxygen. Because the brain uses a lot of oxygen. You can ask any doctor, about it. So the brain activity uses maybe as much or more than even the body activity. So when the body fidgeting stops, and the body movements, and then the mind slows down, and the mind is no longer, churning out thoughts and worries and other types of emotions, that also, decreases the need for oxygen. So therefore, that's tranquilizing the breath, and it becomes very faint. And sometimes you might feel like, oh, my breath has even stopped. But you're still getting subtle amounts, whatever the body needs, it gets. Even sometimes the oxygen comes through the pores of our skin, or it comes in subtle amounts anyway that we may not notice it. But that's, that tranquilizing the breath, that basically finishes that first section on the mindfulness of breathing in both the Satipatthana Sutta and also in the Anapanasati Sutta as well. That basically that first section on breathing is the same. And that is for developing that initial stage of tranquility and becoming centered, in the body. And also that state, if you're practicing vipassana meditation, that state would probably lead to what we call the momentary concentration. That means you become concentrated, and the 5 hindrances would by and large have also subsided. And if you're practicing the Anapana Sati Sutta method, then that might also, that first section might lead to the experiencing of access concentration or even the first jhana, and the hindrances have being suppressed. So again, both of those suttas are the same up to that point. But whether you choose to observe the breathing, focusing on that subtle sensation at the tip of the nose, or you're choosing to focus the attention on the rising and falling of the abdomen, or the expanding and contracting sensations, that is up to the individual meditator as to which of those two focuses of attention they choose to use. Now, normally, people who are practicing, let's say, exclusively by the Anapanasati Sutta, normally they choose to focus on the tip of the nose, because that's where most of the monks who practice that, they emphasize that, or in the commentaries it is explained as being that focusing on that point. But for vipassana meditation, then sometimes they do both. You find that in the Goenka system of meditation, it has your focus at the tip of the nose to develop that concentration for the first 3 days. But in monasteries associated with Upandita in Burma and the Kendo Bodha Vipassana Center and so many other Vipassana centers that are teaching the Mahasi style of Vipassana, they have you focus on the rising and falling movements of the abdomen, or the expanding and contracting of the abdomen. And then there's people like me who have a third method, is not sticking just to the abdomen or sticking just to the nose, but actually feeling the expanding and contracting of even the lower, middle, and upper parts of the breathing process, at least in the beginning. And then when you let go of that deliberate, deeper 3-part breathing, then the breath reverts just back to feeling any particular place where you feel it. By that time, your awareness is already kind of centered there in the middle, so you might feel the breath in the abdomen one time, you might feel part of it in the rib cage another time, or another time you might feel it in the chest. Because the body self-regulates itself, and it kind of knows what it needs. And so that's why the breathing is always changing, depending on your mental states, on your bodily activities. The breath is constantly changing to adapt and adjust the amount of oxygen that the body needs to maintain itself. And that's why if you gain a deep level of samadhi, the need for oxygen becomes very, very less because of no bodily movement or obvious external movements and thinking. But as long as you still have wandering thoughts and fidgeting around from time to time, then the breath will continually be fluctuating to be able to regulate the amount of oxygen that it needs to accommodate the bodily and the mental activity. Now, so after that, having completed that first section on the mindfulness of breathing, then in the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and this is where the 2 sutras start to diverge or go in different directions. So in the mindfulness of the body, when you complete that first section, having tranquilized the breathing and our resting in the present moment, then well, actually, I just wanted to read this analogy of the turner's apprentice. So after saying, I breathe out short, breathing, tranquilizing the whole body formation, says, just as a skilled lathe operator or his apprentice, when making a long turn, understands I make a long turn. Or when making a short turn, understands I make a short turn. And also breathing in long, the monk understands I'm breathing in long, and he trains thus. And I shall breathe out tranquilizing the body's formation. So he says he trains thus. So that implies that you're making some effort, you're training the mind to experience the whole breath body, and you're training the mind to tranquilize the body. So you're training, that means you're making the effort not to move. You're making the effort to relax, to tranquilize the actual physical movements of the body and the mental activities. And then it goes on to say, in this way, the meditator abides contemplating the body as a body internally. He abides contemplating the body as a body externally, where he contemplates both externally and internally. And that means basically he understands that this body lives on breathing. This body needs breath to live. And you see it in your own body, and then every other person that you see externally, you understand, they're also living and existing by breathing. And you could even extrapolate that to animals and any other creature that lives by breathing. That they all experience this in and out breathing. But anyway, and and it says, or else that there is a body is simply established to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. So that refers to the idea that you understand that this mind operates through this body. So that there is this breathing body, but just to the extent to develop the meditation. You're not obsessing about it. In other ways, my body, I can use it for this and this. I can pump iron and win awards. I can, use it for all kind of things. No. He's contemplating the body simply for bare knowledge and mindfulness, not clinging to anything in the world. So you let go of all the clinging to any external things, and you're using this body simply as a way for developing bare knowledge and mindfulness. And that is how a person abides contemplating the body as a body. So that's the first section. And so that's the way that we should try, as I mentioned before, these teachings are given in a step-by-step, gradual progression, because the Buddha understood the nature of the mind and how it operates, and also he understood how the process of gaining mindfulness and concentration, that we have to start with tranquilizing the external parts and then gradually working deeper inside. And then, so that first section leads you to that point where you're kind of basically resting in the present moment. Now, whether the hindrances are totally gone or not, they may not be gone for many people totally, but at least to a certain extent where you're feeling that kind of comfort. You're no longer, kind of fidgeting too much, and you're able to tolerate pains a lot more, or maybe some pains might even have totally vanished. And there still may be some wandering thoughts, but they're not the kind that you obsess about, like the dog pulling your pant leg and pulling you down the street. Just maybe some kind of just wandering thoughts arise, like the picture of your mother arise and vanish, or, just a memory of, something that happened last week. But they don't stick in your mind. You just observe. There's kind of like a little bubble that just kind of comes up. You might notice it, but then it just vanishes. It doesn't stick in the mind. So you still might have some sporadic wandering thoughts, but those don't really disturb one. As I mentioned before, it's getting dragged away by those thoughts that then brings anxiety, worry, fear, because of your obsession with them. But when you just see it as like a little bubble, or it could even be a bubble of desire arise in the mind, or a bubble of agitation. But again, if you don't cling to it and start building it up, then it just dissipates. And it doesn't really disturb the mind too much. So anyway, you're sitting in that present moment awareness. And then the next section of the mindfulness of the body begins. And in some books, the next section will say, and further. This particular translation says, again. I like the further one because it's a further continuation of where you left off in getting the mind centered and tranquil in the present moment. And not just getting stuck in that. Some people just get stuck in that. Oh, wowie, wooey, cool, The body's very light, or they just, they've like, oh, that's enough for me. They've been struggling so long, and finally they reach this state of tranquility, and they're feeling very light, and the mind is quite, some happy sensations. And it's like, that's enough for me. It's like running out of gas. So the and further means to take it a step further, not to get stuck in the tranquility, but use that for going to the next level in developing the mindfulness of the body. And this is basically the 4 postures. So when one is sitting, the mind knows I'm sitting. When one is standing, the mind knows I'm standing. When you're walking, the mind knows I'm walking. When laying down, the mind knows I'm laying down. So again, it's a continuation of the present moment. Now you're shifting from just the breathing to the larger whole body. And how do you know that you're sitting? How do you know that you're sitting? Because of the sensations. Your buttocks pressing the floor. So that's a dead giveaway because your buttocks don't press the floor in the standing position or in the walking position. Maybe in the laying position, but in the way your legs are tucked underneath, or if you're sitting on a chair, how the hands are. So, that means you're feeling the body. It's just not a concept in the mind. You're feeling those sensations, mentally kind of feeling that outline of the body. And through that memory, the mind knows that, this collection of sensations is what what we call is the sitting posture, or this collection of sensations is the standing posture. Because the sensations of the standing posture are different from the sensations of the sitting posture. Is it? And the sensations of the standing posture are different from the sensations of walking. And the sensations of the laying down posture are different from all of those other 3. So it's the attention to sensation, and it's the mind that's kind of permeating. It has that connection to the nervous system. And also it keeps the mind in the present moment. So it's a continually remembering of the present moment. Now, because the breath is stopped, there's no breathing to focus on much, maybe, let's say. Or even if it's still there, but still then the posture, because, this is about also training for your life in the outside. Because in your daily life outside, you may not be able to always be focusing on your breathing, right? When you're doing phone calls, when you're climbing a ladder, when you're walking down the street, driving your car, it's not very easy to keep that attention to the breathing. So this is the method for continuing the meditation outside of the sitting posture. Or outside of the formal type of meditation. And so that helps the mind to stay connected to the present moment, so you're aware of the postures. And also you're aware of how does this body move. The body can't do anything by itself without an intention, without the mind to sort of drive it. So this mind is sort of the driver of this body. It's the mind that decides to sit. It's the mind that decides to stand or to walk or to lay down or to do the other activities that I'll mention in a moment. And then again, he contemplates that internally in himself. When he sees somebody else walking, he says, that person's walking. or that person's standing, or that person's sitting, or that person's lying down. Then you might say, why would the Buddha want you to know that? He wants you to know that because to understand that it's a universal thing. These things are not just happening to you. They're happening to every living being is basically operating the same way. And you understand, what is this body? This body lives because of we breathing in air and the blood is pumping. And as long as those things are working properly, then life goes on. But the moment something happens and the breathing stops, the heart beating stops, because of one or other reasons, this body would die. And when you see somebody moving, you can see, let's say you see somebody moving to the pastry shop to buy a pastry. Okay, greed is causing them to go into the pastry shop. Or you see two people arguing. These people are, this attachment or anger, whatever it is they're arguing about. That's what's making the body do that. Or if anything else. So you see how it's basically, this body doesn't do anything without desire. And desire is also a kind of a anger, because it's or trying to get rid of something you don't want is a kind of a desire to get away from something, or desire to defeat somebody in a talk or something else. So that's part of also the understanding that goes along with the contemplation of the body is, what powers this body? Really hardly anybody ever thinks about it, but the Buddha thought about it because it's important for understanding the nature of conflict and suffering, and really what drives this body. It's driven by greed, hatred, and delusion for the most part. Although it's also driven by the opposites of loving kindness and compassion and selflessness too, when a person reaches a certain stage. But common, ordinary person's mind is normally driven by that. So, and it says, or else. Now, if you don't want to do that, it's interesting. After the Buddha say he contemplates the body internally, externally, both internally and externally, he understands the arising nature of the body, the ceasing nature of the body. Or at the end he says, or else. It means, okay, if you don't want to do that, or else, the person abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world, or else the mindfulness that there is this body is established just to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and mindfulness. Again, the same phrase that was used previously. And one without any clinging for the world. And so this too is how a person abides contemplating the body, is the body in terms of the four postures. So that's why in my instructions to you, after sitting meditation, I have you stand. Because many places they never tell you to do standing meditation. So when we're standing around, because you're not trained, the person just lets the mind wander around, and you're in the post office looking at all the wanted posters or the missing children, or, you're in the supermarket looking at all the people's magazines, wondering where Michael Jackson was reborn or something. Instead, just standing. Whenever you're standing, waiting in a line, just standing, standing. Understanding this body is, heart is pumping, keeping the body alive, breath is going in alive, various sensations are coming and going, and you're just there with it. Cultivating your mindfulness and knowledge, mindfulness and wisdom. Here we're going to go over one more section. And then after the 4 postures, this is when it gets very interesting. We call the full awareness. It says, then further, so before you were just in some static posture, sitting and standing, laying down, of course walking, but then, and further, a person is one who acts in full awareness when going forward and returning. So you're going out somewhere and you're coming back from somewhere. Or they act in full awareness when looking ahead and looking away. So if you're going to turn the head, look at something, you do it with that full awareness. Why am I looking? Okay, there was a sound. There was a desire to see what the sound was. That is what's causing the muscles in the neck to turn. That's the full awareness. That's what's part of clear comprehension and full awareness, is you understand, why is the head turning now? Because there's a desire to look, or you have a pain in your neck. So by turning, you're hoping the pain might go away. And then what is causing you to turn the head back? It's because you finished looking at what you want to look at, and now you want to do something else. So the head gets turned back. Or if you're going to look up, or you're going to look down. Or if you're going to flex out your arm, why am I flexing out my arm? Or lifting the arm. Maybe there's an itch on your head, and you see that aversion to the itch. And so you're understanding that it's the desire that's pushing the arm up. And if you do it slow enough, you can actually see that desire that keeps pushing the arm. So let's imagine you have an itch on your head, or some stinging sensation. And we try to just not itch if we can, but let's say, okay, you decide to itch, okay. And then you see that that itch is not going to go away by itself. The arm has to lift. So it's the desire that causes the arm to lift up. And it lifts up a few, let's say an inch. And then the mind understands, well, that's not enough. You better lift some more. And it lifts again. There's not enough. It lifts some more. And so desire, because the brain understands all these spatial differences and distance and all that. So it's, you know how the brain operates. So the brain knows how far it is, how far you have to keep moving. So it keeps, each one is an impermanence. So the arm lifts up. That's an arising and vanishing of one movement, arising and vanishing of another movement, arising and vanishing of another movement, arising and vanishing of another movement, until finally it gets to nearby, and then there's the touching. And then there's the rubbing up and rubbing down until you think that the itch is gone, and then it's the desire to put the arm back down. So it's not a matter of just being aware of that, it's a matter of understanding what is driving this body. And the purpose of doing that is because you're really zooming in on the mind, and you're really starting to understand the intricate complexity of the mind and the nervous system, and the body-mind interaction. And that's a very, very powerful and deep level of awareness. that can only be gotten through this type of, direct observation. You can read about it in a book maybe, but actually to see it occurring in that focused state of awareness is, a very powerful insight, because it leads to the idea that there's no self doing this. It was because of desire to get rid of a painful feeling, or desire to have a pleasurable feeling, that's causing all these actions. You didn't decide it. You decided it from your past habits and how you've trained yourself from baby up to the present by your continuous repetition of different ways of behaving and acting with certain stimulations. And you see, there's nobody that's really absolutely, in an absolute way, controlling or deciding. And so that's the entrance to anatta. That's the entry point for understanding of anatta. So all that is part of this kind of training if one wants to take it to, again, the next step, the next level. Because again, the Buddha wouldn't have explained it in this way if there wasn't a purpose for it. The Buddha didn't waste any words. And so every single thing he said normally is important and has a purpose to it. So anyway, he goes through everything you could possibly do during the day, flexing the limbs, getting up, sitting down, putting on your clothing, carrying anything that you may be carrying somewhere. Of course, he was talking to monks, so he was talking about wearing your robes and carrying your bowl, but, that could pertain to anybody. Just, why are you putting on your clothes? Well, I want to get arrested for exposure by a policeman, or laughed at maybe. So anyway, there's always a reason for something. Of course, normally we're oblivious to most of that. We're just rushing around doing things. But all this is going on behind the scenes. And eating food. So we're talking about that. When eating, drinking, chewing, food, acts in full awareness. Why am I eating? The desire to live. Why are you, and then also defecating and urinating? Why are you defecating? Why are you urinating? Then you examine, well, this body depends on all this food, and that's what happens. And it's not necessarily a pleasing sight. And so it's developing that full understanding of really what this body is and the things that it does to survive. And then even when falling asleep, fall asleep with full awareness. So when you lay down at night, you lay down and you could lay down on your right side like the Buddha's reclining posture, but you lay down and you at least try to spend the first minute or so just understanding that now is the time for going to sleep and practice a laying awareness. Or maybe, follow your breath. And if you can do that, you'll go to sleep very nicely and have a good sleep. But then also in awaking, you awake with full awareness. And so this is what I had wanted to, to advise you also, like whenever, tomorrow morning or whenever you get up from a nap or whatever, but in the morning especially, when you notice the body first waking up, to have that mindfulness right there. I'm waking now. The body is waking now. And understand, what does that mean? Okay, Why am I awake? Maybe it's a full bladder and you feel the need to relieve that. Or maybe it's a really dry throat and dry mouth and you want to drink a water. Or maybe it's time to meditate. Maybe the gong rang. You hear the gong, the sound of the gong or your alarm clock penetrating that fog of sleep, and you feel that. That's the moment. If you can have a mindfulness right there at that moment, that's very powerful. To actually know that you're waking. And then don't rush. Be aware, okay, what do I need to do now? Okay, you need to grab a hold of the sheet or the blanket and pull it over this way. And then mindfully sit up. And be aware of that urge to want to rush. Even if it's full bladder, squeeze your sphincter muscles and hold it in. And try to get up mindfully, and then stand up, maybe do a little stretch, take a deep breath, and then mindfully, go to do what you need to do. That's why I ring the gong a half an hour early. Or maybe this morning I didn't, but so when you get up, not to rush. So you can get up mindfully. You have enough time to get up mindfully and not to rush to get into the meditation hall. It's very interesting. A lot of people rush to get to the meditation hall. Why? Then the mind is in the future. And then when you get there, you have to spend more time quieting the mind down. But instead, if you practice slow walking and you're in the present moment, even though you might be going, you might know where you're going, your mind is focused in the present moment on feeling the steps, feeling the body, centered. And so when you finally reach the meditation hall, you're already meditating. And you simply lower the body down from the standing meditation that you were doing, cross the legs, and bingo. You're already in a good level of awareness already. Maybe quicker than the person that rushed to the meditation hall to get there, and then has to sit down and calm their body down. So anyway, these are just different things to try to keep in mind. But this is, you have, 6, at least 5 or 6 more days at a retreat. And so, there's enough time to integrate these things. And this is what I encourage you to do, especially with the movements, and especially with the arms. Even when sitting, if there's be aware of that urge to want to move, especially the arms, or even the fingers, to wiggle a finger. Everything happens through sensation. And it's usually because there's some unpleasant sensation and the desire to get rid of it. So even blinking, the reason you blink normally is because there's an irritation in the eye or eyelid, and you blink with a hope to get that irritation out. Even right now, I have an irritation there. So I blink. But sometimes you can't control it, but sometimes you can. And if you're aware of the sensation, you can see that urge to want to blink or the urge to want to move. Now, I'm not saying you can't blink. Don't go home and say, Bhante said I can't blink. I said, what? What kind of crazy monk is that? But to see that, what is driving again that desire to move your arm? Because maybe it's painful, or you think if you... Now, this is the point where you can do that. Now, if your hands have unmindfully gone down, and you can see that your hands are now pressing into your legs, causing discomfort, now you see, okay, to lift the arms up would be helpful then. So you understand that hopefully to help improve my posture, that's the reason I'm going to lift my hands up. And you see the intention to lift, 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 or to straighten your spine or lift your head up, whatever it might be. And you mindfully do that. But you do it mindfully and slowly. So it doesn't have to impede your meditation practice. A lot of people say, oh, if they move, it's going to block their meditation. Yeah, that's if they move really quickly. But if you move very slowly and you're aware of each little mind-body connection, you're still staying in a very deep level of awareness. Or taking a deep, slow breath. The mind is staying in the moment. It's not in the future to get somewhere, but in the moment you're getting there to where you want to go. And then when you reach that, the mind is in the moment still. It's the present moment that's concentration. Not staying on only one particular object perhaps, but it's the mind that's in the present moment. That's called momentary concentration, in fact. So, karnika samadhi. So there's that term we use in vipassana meditation. That it's that moment-to-moment, present moment awareness that's called a momentary concentration, but it's still a concentrated state. You're not being distracted by anything. So, anyway, I think we might have gone over enough for today, and try to keep some of these things in mind as we continue our meditation. Okay? Now, did you understand why you were doing that? Okay, you can slowly stand up to stretch your legs. But be aware that you're standing up. No, because there's pain in the legs, I want to stand up to relieve the discomfort.